For the past several weeks, I've been traveling, and I've been traveling in my capacity as the Assistant Director of Soto Zen Buddhism North American Office, which is a denominational branch. So there's a denomination in Japan called the Soto School. Surprise, surprise, institutions. There's a way to organize them, and for religious organizations, usually denominations of some kind form. So in Japan, there's a denomination called the Soto School, or Soto Zen School, and I've been part of that since my ordination in the 90s, and I've taken over more leadership within the denomination for North America. And so I'm the assistant director. The director is Akiba Roshi, Gengo Akiba Roshi, who some of you met in the mountain seat ceremony. He came here. One of the important jobs of the director is to go and make sure these kind of like Abbot installations and things are happening in the correct way. Plus, he's been an important teacher and mentor to me for many years. They used to call the director the bishop, which I thought was way cooler than director. But people, somewhere in, like, I think in the 2000s, people started getting really nervous about religion. I'm not sure why. And so all these kind of words like bishop, they decide to turn to director. So anyway, I'd much rather be able to say I'm the assistant bishop. But the way it's translated now is assistant director. So anyway, in that role, our office does many things. A lot of them are boring. It's paperwork, just like a bureaucracy. You need a bureaucracy to keep track of things, and that's not a bad thing. So a lot of our work is that. I don't do hardly any of that work. But another part of our work is to connect with Soto Zen temples in North America, primarily those that are part of the denomination. Many of the Soto Zen temples in North America, like this temple, are part of the Japanese denomination, and we're branch temples, overseas temples of that denomination. But there are many, many temples that don't belong to that denomination. And so we visit the temples that are part of the denomination, but we're also visiting all kinds of Soto temples that are not part of the denomination, and trying to have good connection and to cultivate Soto Zen in North America in a general sense, because we also believe that this is good for the denomination. It's good for all the temples to have that kind of connection. And so I was in Vermont for a week at Chaoshan Temple, which I've been very good friends with the founding abbot there, Taihaku, who passed away 3 years ago, and was able to go and help with her funerals. And this was the 3rd anniversary, so I went and was there for a week, and we had the 3rd anniversary, which is an important anniversary for celebrating in a Buddhist sense, celebrating, commemorating, memorializing. And so that was great. Got to spend a good chunk of time with Kenzan, who's the new abbot, Taihaku Roshi's student, and I got to see some loons. Those are some weird birds. That I get loon, like where's all come. These are some strange birds, but very cool. And they so we went we went canoeing on a Vermont lake. Very romantic, huh? And there were loons, and we went swimming. It was nice. And then I was down into New Jersey, flew into New Jersey, and then took an Uber to Manhattan, and I was in Manhattan a couple nights, and then Brooklyn a couple nights, and then upstate New York, up into Massachusetts, and visiting about 10 temples, and giving talks and meeting with the people there. It was really inspiring, and good to meet so many people who are on this same path and see how they're unfolding it in their communities. And so this morning, I'd like to talk a little bit really about what I said to them. So I gave a talk most places that I went, and I thought, well, coming back, I should maybe say the same thing to our community here. So I'm going to kind of give you a similar talk to what I gave them. And it's about this issue of transmission, about the issue of how Dharma, how Buddhist teachings travel in the world, and how it is that we're able to touch them and be touched by them, and why it's important for us to consider what is the responsibility of being part of a tradition in which we're connected to a broad swath of people, not only people, but it's easier to focus on people. So this broad swath of people in space, but also in time. So there's this circle, going around traveling to different temples, you can feel, oh, there's this big circle of the Soto Zen school, which is like a reflection of this bigger circle of just all humanity, which is like a reflection of a bigger circle, which is just like all beings. And one of these circles doesn't negate the other, right? So sometimes we think that way. We're like, well, you can't just talk about the circle of Soto Zen, because what about all other people who aren't Soto Zen? Well, that's the reason it's a circle, right? It's a circle nested in a circle, nested in a circle, nested in a circle. And all of those have their own integrity, just like our bodies. Right, if you just focus on like, well, my body's not really a thing. I mean, you knew that, right? It's hard to remember, right? But your body's just this kind of like a loose conglomeration of mostly things that are not you. Or maybe all things that are not you, right? But we call it a body, right? But if you neglect that, if you say, oh, well, my body's no good, I have to think only of all the other things that aren't my body, and then I talk about my body, and I focus out there, then you just starve to death. You don't take care of it. So same thing with organizations. What is this circle that you're going to focus on? So that connection in space is also in time. It's harder for us to see it in time or to recognize it, because in space we can look to our right, we can look to our left, we can look forward and backward and up and down and all these different directions, and we think that our things are existing in just those dimensions. But actually there's many dimensions that things exist in, and if we think of time, things also exist in time, right? There's a duration of things. My size is currently 53 years, 10 months, and some number of days, which I can't calculate in my head so quickly. Right? That's kind of the size of my body in time. And I hope it gets a little bit bigger. It's not likely to get twice the size that it is now, right? But that will be my body in time. Right? But because I can't look forward and backward so easily in time the way that I can in space, we tend to not think of the circle of time. We tend to just think we're moving through time in a kind of linear way. It's like being on a roller coaster. I like roller coasters, surprise, surprise. And I especially like the ones that go upside down. And when you go upside down on a roller coaster, the really fun thing is you don't feel like you're going in a circle, right? You're not exactly going in a straight line, but you're just going. And then there's a circle that's made. I kind of think that's how time is, right? It's kind of how the circle in time is. You're just on this track going through. But actually there's a circle that's happening. So caring for tradition, caring for practice, caring for a certain kind of gateway that Soto Zen offers to us, we have to recognize this circle in space and the circle in time. And we have a core teaching in our school. It's called a sastra. Any writings that are written by an ancestor are called a sastra. People more familiar with the term sutra. Right? And sutra technically refers to the teaching of a Buddha. So we talk about like the Lotus Sutra or the Diamond Sutra. Those are two that we talk a lot about here, or the Heart Sutra. Those are all teachings that are given by a Buddha. But there are also ancestors, and ancestors give teachings. So one of the most prominent ancestors in our school is a fellow named Rockhead, Sekito, which means rockhead, which is kind of cool. He wrote a sastra called The Harmony of Difference and Sameness. And we chant this very often in our lineage. If you come for morning service sometimes, on many days we chant this particular sastra. And his teaching, right at the front, at the beginning, the first two lines, is he says, the mind of the great sage of India, or you could say the heart of the great sage of India, is intimately transmitted from west to east. The heart of the great sage of India. The great sage of India is referring to Shakyamuni Buddha. The heart of Shakyamuni Buddha, or the heart of awakening, or the heart of awakening in this world, is intimately transmitted from west to east. This is just a foundational teaching about the circle of Dharma throughout space and time. And it focuses here on the intimate transmission. It's not that someone just recorded the words of Shakyamuni Buddha and put them in a scroll, and the scroll got handed down and recorded very carefully every time it got rewritten. There are many religions that rely on this. particularly the religions of the book, Abrahamic faith. There's a lot more to them than that, right? But they really focus on the importance of the book as being what carries the message, the Word of God. But that's not how Buddhism is. It's not that there's something which is created and that's just passed down, but the heart mind of Shakyamuni Buddha, the heart mind of awakening itself is transmitted. And this is a kind of radical thing. There isn't it's not a thing. There's not a thing that can be given. There is this intimacy of transmission. There is both a teacher and a student, but there's no teacher and student. There's both a multiplicity, but there's also a singularity. And that's why the Dharma can be received in this circle of time and space. Now, in a practical sense, that means face to face. That means that we practice in a way that is like this, just right pressed up against each other, for better or for worse. There's a reason we burn incense. Actually, there's two reasons. One is to feed the spirits, because that's what they eat. It's fragrance. Up into the higher realms, they say the food is fragrance. Right? So it's communication in that way. But the other reason is because you stink. Me too. Right? So this intimacy is not always just easy, drawing close to others. We all have our own fragrance, if we say it in a nice way. But this kind of togetherness is what the transmission is about. And so in a formal sense of transmission, someone who's entrusted with the lineage in a next generation, this face-to-face is emphasized. Okay? Warm hand to warm hand, sometimes people say. Okay? It's not abstract. It's not a thing apart from us, but it is something we're already endowed with, that we meet in each other. And that's how it can move. Now, this translation, intimately transmitted from west to east, is highly interpretive. It's not actually what Sekito said, which I'll get to in a second. But west to east, here in this translation, refers to a legend from the time of Shakyamuni Buddha. When the legend or the prophecy was that after the Buddha passed away or entered into final nirvana, that the Dharma would travel from the west, in this case is India. It wasn't India at that time, but South Asia, like just the kind of foothills of the Himalayas. It will travel from there to the east, which would have been China, Korea, Vietnam, Japan, now North America. That's the Mahayana kind of trajectory. There was another branch of Mahayana that went down into Southeast Asia and then disappeared, and Theravada Buddhism and Islam and Hinduism became prominent in those areas. That's the Mahayana. The Vajrayana Buddhism into Tibet, actually up in the Kashmir region into Tibet, also has lineage that comes through China, Korea, Japan, Vietnam, etc. It's esoteric lineages. So, in fact, we saw that happen. Right? But what Sekito Kisen says is a little bit different. He doesn't say from west to east the Buddha was transmitted the Buddha's heart was transmitted intimately. It's much more subtle. That's one of the things that's really beautiful about Chinese. I know there's few of you who read and write Chinese. That the characters kind of hang there. In English, you have a lot of little words that clarify the relationship of the various words to each other, like in this case, east and west. So if you just say east, west, or west, east, you're left with this question, what's the relationship between these? But in Chinese, actually in this poem, he just says east, west. He doesn't say east to west or west to east. He just says east, west. Those are the first two characters. And then the third character is intimate. Intimately. You could, if you going to make it a adverb, then you have to say intimately. You can't just say intimate. But in Chinese, you don't do that. It's either intimate, intimately, whatever. It's just a character, okay? A beautiful character. That's actually the character that I asked my teacher to write when I left Japan. This hangs on my wall. If you come visit me for Sanzen, you'll see it. So, east, west, intimate, mutual connection. Those are the 5 characters. East, west, intimate, mutual connection. The word transmitted isn't actually in there. That's why I say it's interpretive. It sort of sounds like there's some movement in the way that we chant it, which is it's a good understanding. It follows that first story that I told. But here we have a different kind of story. We have a story of one Buddha body. We have a story of an indivisible body of awakening in which East and West can be talked about, but there's no place to really separate them. There's no way to really divide East and West. That East and West are intimate and mutually connected. Now, one way you could think about that sounds a little abstract, is if you take this and so in this hall, what direction is that?
North.
North.
You got it. In this hall, this is a little trick. The Buddha always faces south. And you would think, well, why is the Buddha not on that wall then, facing that way? Because whatever the way the Buddha faces is south. That's the way we understand that. So if that's north, south, and then east and west. So this side's west, this side's east. Okay, stick with me. So east and west. So we're so used to thinking of east and west as opposites and kind of separate things. But if you take one thing, like this stick, and you say the east side and the west side, where's the difference? Where can you find the separating place between east and west? Actually, any place you point to, you could talk about an east and a west in relationship to the place that you pointed to. But you couldn't find any point in which the east turns into the west or the west turns into the east. And if you said, I'm not so into the east, we're kind of done with that. Didn't we get everything we needed to from Asia? Of course, we're Americans. We've been involved in Zen for, like 50 years, even 100. Maybe. We must have gotten everything. We don't need all that anymore. Why learn these other languages and all this cultural baggage and all this stuff? Let's just take the West, right? So what happens? You cut it in half, you take the west side. What do you have? You have a west and an east, right? So you can't avoid it, right? There's one body. And this is, it's kind of just a little gimmick to point at a stick and talk about that. But this is part of what Sekitoki-san is asking us to look at. There is a whole body of awakening. The Buddha, upon his awakening, looking at the morning star, said, I, the great earth, and all beings, together, at one time, or at the same time, achieve to the Buddha way. That's a radical statement. He didn't say, that's kind of happening right now and you'll figure it out later. He said, there's one circle through all of time and all of space that is the body of awakening. That's what's happening right now. And that's actually what's happening all the time. And so this one body of awakening in time and space, I've been calling a circle. And it's the way in which the Buddha Dharma flourishes in the world. It's not as if something is past exactly. It's not as if there were things in Japan that weren't here, or things in China that aren't here, or things in India that aren't here. Right? That's not the point. But that the awakening of the body, present everywhere, in what way do we care for that? And that's what a tradition is about. So there's an image in the Lotus Sutra which also speaks to this a bit. And so I just want to read it to you. One thing I noticed on my trip this time, which I was very happy about, is people are hungry for religious imagery. A lot of people are confused by their hunger for religious imagery because they're not so necessarily game about religion. A little worried about religion, which I am too, by the way. But because of that, and a lot of people are maybe in some way frustrated by their religion of origin, and that's why they've come to Buddhism, then when things get a little bit too religious, it gets a little it can get a little scary, or it can push some buttons like, I'm not sure about this. That's totally understandable and important to recognize that if you have some of those reactions to the religious stuff. If you're not having any reaction to religious stuff, you're kidding yourself, just by the way. So like, watch that. If you're like, yeah, I'm just fine with it all, but it doesn't really work for me that well, that's like, you're probably not paying attention. Okay? It will have some effect, so pay attention to it a little bit. So anyway, what I noticed traveling around is that people are really hungry for those images, but one of the reasons people are confused is they relate with religion and religious images or religious teachings through no fault of their own, relate with them with the idea that these religious images or teachings are to circumscribe the truth. That this religious teaching is like someone's drawing a circle or a box, and they're saying everything inside the box is true and the stuff outside the box is false. And that's how I know that I'm a Buddhist, or I'm a Christian, or I'm a Jew, or I'm a Muslim, or I'm a pagan, or whatever, is kind of, okay, what's the box which has all the stuff I believe in it? And we've come to think that's what religion is. Actually, most people have not practiced religion that way. That's a very particular time and place. I blame it on the Protestants. You can blame it on who you like. But anyway, that's a kind of way that we tend to relate with it. But religious images are much more precious than this. They don't give us a circumscribed truth if we learn how to listen to them. They give us a gateway. They give us a different way of looking at the world. They give us a possibility of a different basis for how it is that we are considering what it is that we're experiencing, the regard we have for what it is that we're meeting in our life. And so when we hear an image, the idea there is not say, I believe it or don't believe it, but let that religious image affect you. You could ask yourself, what would the world be like if I saw it through these eyes? If I considered things in this way and then looked at the world, what would it be like? And if you're a kind of visionary person, that image might appear to you in some way, but it also might just be a feeling, right? Or it might be some of the words that stick with you, and just let them work on you a little bit. So this is one of the most famous images in the Lotus Sutra, and I think I've probably read it in this hall many times before, so many of you would have heard it. This happens right at the beginning in the introduction to the sutra. Sitting cross-legged, the Buddha entered the state of concentration called the place of innumerable meanings, in which his body and mind were completely motionless. Then Mandarava, great Mandarava, Manjushaka, and great Manjushaka flowers rained down from the sky on the Buddha and the entire assembly, while the whole Buddha world trembled and shook in 6 ways. Then the whole congregation, monks and nuns, laymen and laywomen, gods, dragons, satyrs, centaurs, asuras, griffins, chimeras, pythons, humans and non-humans, as well as minor kings and the wheel-turning saintly kings, astonished because this had never happened before, with palms together and with complete attention, joyously looked up at the Buddha. From the tuft of white hair between his eyebrows, one of his characteristic features, the Buddha emitted a beam of light, illuminating 18,000 worlds in the east, so that there was nowhere that it did not reach, down to the lowest hell and up to the highest heaven. In those worlds, all the living beings in the 6 states could be seen. Likewise, the Buddhas existing at present in those lands could be seen, and the sutra teachings those Buddhas were preaching could be heard. Monks and nuns, laymen and laywomen who had attained the way through practice could also be seen. Further, one could see bodhisattvas, the great ones, walking the bodhisattva way due to various causes and conditions, with various degrees of faith and understanding and in various forms. Likewise, Buddhas who had entered complete nirvana could be seen, and one could see their stupas made of the 7 precious materials, stupas that had been built to hold the remains of these Buddhas after they entered complete nirvana. It's a really beautiful image. If you like that kind of thing, consult Venerable Google image search, and you will find many. This is a very common theme of art in East Asia. The Buddha sitting in Zazen. The samadhi of innumerable meanings is what it's called in the Lotus Sutra, which itself is interesting to pay attention to. Like you think, oh, I'm going to sit and this is what it's going to be about. No. Yeah, it's innumerable. The meanings are innumerable. It's going to be about everything. And that's frustrating often because you're like, what am I doing, right? But that's what that samadhi is about. Right? The total multiplicity of the significance of that sitting. And this total stillness, a total equanimity. And in that place, flowers rain down and the whole world shakes. This is something that happens in the Lotus Sutra a lot, and it signals something important. You might experience this too, right? I mean, earthquake possibly, but I mean just in your own feeling about being. There's something celestial raining down, and there's something shaking, and there's a kind of everything and a kind of presence, which is still. And this assembly of all these various beings. My favorite's chimeras. You should have your own favorite, the python, or you could choose humans if you like. But all these kinds of beings. And they look up at the Buddha because they know something's about to happen. And then this beam of light is emitted from his forehead. A lot of people think that there's, in the Buddha iconography, that this is a third eye. But in the traditional iconography, it's actually a tuft of white hair, which is in a spiral. It's kind of a little bit weird to us today, but this is the traditional iconography. And from this spiral, this light emerges, and it lays over, in the sutra it says 18,000 worlds in the east, innumerable worlds. All the way from the lowest hell up to the highest heaven, and all, it says the 6 realms, so these 6 realms in between, hell and heaven, humans, asuras or angry gods, animals, and hungry ghosts. Those are the traditional 6 realms. And through all of those realms, all these beings, right, all are touched by that light. And that all these beings that are practicing the way can be seen, and the teachings can be heard from all of those various worlds. So this kind of singularity of the Buddha and this kind of multiplicity of all the realms, something to really pay attention to. Now, Dogen Zenji, the founder of this school in Japan, says something interesting. He says that this light is not like there was a bolt of white silk which is unfurled from the Buddha's brow and laid over this great assembly. He says it's not like that. It's a very poetic image, if you think about that. Like the bolt of silk was tied to his forehead and then it's like laid out. He's saying it's not like that. It's not like it travels from the Buddha over all of those assemblies. It's not like he's got a headlamp on. It's not like there's a light that's shining from his head. That's the wrong way to understand what the illumination is. This is what Dogen says. And then he says, one of my favorite things that Dogen says. He says, the illumination of the East is the East's illumination. Or the illumination of the Eastern worlds is the luminosity of the Eastern worlds. It's not as if there's a light that travels from the Buddha and then lights up all of these beings as if they were separate things. But it is that the Eastern worlds are luminous, that the Buddha can illuminate them. The Buddha's illumination of those Eastern worlds is simply seeing the luminosity of all beings. The one body of Buddha that is all of those beings, even the ones that are in horrible conditions. That's what we call illumination. Not that the Buddha's got it and then is going to shine it on these separate beings. The Buddha realized there's no separate being. That's what illumination is. So that image gives us an invitation to a one body. Of course, I much prefer the Buddha over all of that assembly, even though some of the situations are pretty good. A lot of them are not so good. So yeah, I want that side. In this case, I want the Western side. The Buddha's in the West. I don't want the Eastern side. It's complicated. It gets tiring. But actually, the Buddha doesn't play that game. The Buddha says this whole body is this body of awakening. And when we try to separate them, that's where we create division, misunderstanding, and where suffering emerges. So my message while I was traveling around is, this is why I agreed to be the assistant director of the denominational office, even though I have plenty of things to do. You have to decide the things you're going to invest in or not invest in. And it was a hard decision for me to decide that. It takes me away from my work here at the temple, but we have a lot of good teachers here. We have very strong community, and it's not as if I have to be here all the time. And it's actually healthy, I think, for our community that I'm gone sometimes. Not for too long, but for some time. And so I chose this because what I'm talking about here, that's what animates my motivation for wanting to connect with these places. And it's very easy to become insular as a introspective tradition where we're spending a lot of time in a posture which looks introspective. I mean, it is introspective, but it's not supposed to just go inward. It's also supposed to go outward. It's easy to become insular and cut off from others. And so I guess I encourage you in a couple ways. One is think well of the work that I'm doing. Please. And if you have questions about it, ask me about other places. But also, as you're traveling, coming into the summer now, people travel out. As you're traveling, go visit places. Go see other communities. You don't even have to travel to do that. You can go over to Zen West, which is just a few blocks from here. You can go to Shinkai Blue Cliff Zen group or Zen center. Those are two Zen places that are in town. There's the Priory that's up on Teagloop. Yeah. And then there's other Buddhist places that aren't, Zen in particular, right? So there's all kinds of things happening. Of course, there's books. There's different people giving teachings. Pay attention to all of it. Not as a way to pull yourself to or from anything, but just as a way to recognize that whole body of what it is that we're engaged in. I believe that the time has come for North American Buddhists to circle up. And what I mean by circle up is not be afraid to call ourselves Buddhist. Not that everyone has to call themselves Buddhist, to call themselves Buddhist and then to move accordingly. We've been shy about that. And mostly people coming to it with this very kind of sophisticated understanding. Well, there's not really even such thing as a Buddhist. What's a Buddhist? It's not a Buddhist. That's why we're Buddhist. And so we have this kind of very way of thinking about it, deconstructing kind of what it is, which is healthy. Right? So many people just grab onto a title and then they inflict the dark side of whatever it is that they have on other people by grabbing onto the title. So it's good that we do that. But it's also time. It's also time for people to recognize that there's a role to play, and I believe that time has really come. And so that's why I'm doing this kind of work and very happy to do it. I also believe it will start bringing more and more interesting people to our temple here at Buddha Eye. And so I made a lot of good friends, and I think we'll have some visitors from other places, and hopefully they will shake us up a little bit. So any questions? It could be about anything or comments. Mm-hmm.
Do you think, speaking of traveling, do you think that there's any chance that Buddhism could have traveled and in any way influenced early Judeo-Christian ideas?
Yeah, there's a lot of people. I mean, the theory that Jesus went and studied with the Buddhists. I mean, I don't know what to make of that exactly. Sounds right to me. I mean, but there was very creative religious what could you say, cross-fertilization, interpenetration happening at the very, very roots. I would say even the kind of things that would have happened between, say, early Abrahamic faiths and Buddhism. I mean, that would even be like later, like even before that, like it goes way back. And so there's very interesting things that happened in the Persian, kind of Persia, Kashmir, that type of region, big influence on Buddhism, but also influence the other direction. Early Greek philosophy, there's a lot of conjecture about how Buddhism and the Greek philosophy influenced each other. So I can't imagine there wasn't. Zoroastrianism, and the kind of area which Abraham was reported to have traveled from to come into the Promised Land, that's all in the hot belly of this kind of religious imagination, time and place. So yeah, it must be. They got wrong a little bit, but we're patient with them. Hi.
Sometimes in my practice, I notice something very beautiful and appealing, and a lot of the time it has the flavor of like liberation and openness, and my heart wants so badly to help that liberation and openness continue. Yeah. Somewhere along the way, I can get lost, and something gets congealed or calcified.
Yeah.
And I start to think it looks this way, and I want to protect it, but it gets hard, and then suffering starts to arise, and this has happened over and over. And I'm curious if you have any commentary on that, or
welcome to being human.
Yeah. I'm wondering if that's just going to be something I'm going to have to continue to come back to.
Yep. Okay. Yep. But let me say something about that. Why it's not just an inevitable downside of being human, but how it's actually part of this image I'm presenting from the Lotus Sutra. I've been talking about one side of this image, which is the wholeness of the body, in the sense of this kind of I don't have to be so divisive. It's one whole body. But there's another implication to this. And it's one of the reasons I really love this particular image. A lot of our images for Buddhist practice are more like a mandala, where the Buddha's at the center, and then everything lays out from the center, which is the Buddha consciousness. That's beautiful. That is a way to understand awakening. But in this image, something else is happening. There's an encounter. And that's what we're doing. And if we're really going to encounter, we have to give up our centeredness. So we think to meet something, if we're placing ourselves at the center, or our perception at the center, or our position at the center, we don't actually meet another thing. And in this image, the Buddha's meeting of these myriad worlds requires a decentering of the Buddha. I believe that's actually what the Buddha's doing. It's not centering Buddha, but a really sincere meeting. And a really sincere meeting where we decenter ourselves is very challenging. It means that you have to meet another situation, another person, another being, with allowing their total autonomy, their total truth, their total spiritual significance, even if they smell bad, literally or metaphorically. And that encounter is what we're called to in this practice. And so that kind of calcification that you talk about is or kind of hardening, that's exactly what happens in encounter. We're trying to figure out how can I meet this? And in trying to figure out how to meet it, our consciousness reduces it to certain ideas, images, conceptions. That's very natural. It's also diluted, but it's very natural. So we don't want to kick delusion out of the equation. don't get rid of the, in this case, don't get rid of the East, which is all these different things. Don't get rid of that. It actually needs to be there. So the way that we calcify, the way that we, the way that we reduce, that's all there. But then to illuminate it. And the illumination isn't to disregard it, but it's to see, it isn't easy to meet others. It isn't easy to decenter myself and to just let the wholeness of the situation be a difficult encounter. And that's a lot of where our practice is. The other one's good. You sit and sometimes you get this kind of very peaceful place where everything's just, and the bird sings and you're like, I know the bird is not outside me. Hallelujah, it's great. And it's good. We should have those kind of experiences. But then those experiences, one of the reasons they're most important is because they can encourage us to go into places where we don't really see the whole. In fact, we have to get rid of seeing the whole to actually enact the wholeness. And that's where this tradition is quite severe. All of our karma will be revealed through trying to live a life based on that. So I say it's a sign of good practice, really.
Briefly, in encountering others, does that also apply to encountering the conditions of our own lives?
100%, yeah. When I say others,
Similar idea.
I mean outside and inside.
Outside
and inside. Yeah, so there's a whole bunch of beings just right here, and there's a Buddha right here. And that Buddha in the West illuminating the East is all both internally and externally happening. There's not really an inside or outside, but we imagine it to be so. And that's the way we experience. So it's good to think that way. Like actually there's this whole internal worlds which are equally so. And then the really important thing, don't kick out the deluded beings. But don't kick the Buddha out either.
Hojo-san,
Hi.
in this circle of time, or in the circle of time, it is impossible maybe for any particular human to feel that their time is not special.
Yeah.
And whatever circumstances we have now in our current world, it's like this is the most complicated, the most difficult, the most interesting. It has to be different from all those Yakulas in the past. And so we're special because we're here now. And so I hear a lot a question of how do we take this tradition and make it relevant, or how do we make it the medicine for our particular circumstance and our problems? Is this fundamentally an issue, or is there something really important to be? What is the important way that we can take that sense of our time is special and make it not a delusion or not self-centered in the way that I often feel?
Yeah. Well, I mean, I think it's that same practice. Can we meet the conditions of the day, not by centering one place from which to look, and then trying to figure it out accordingly. Right? So that's very natural to happen, right? Like, so we say, like, well, if everybody would meditate and just like chill out a little bit, then the world would heal. I mean, even if that was possible, I sort of doubt that it would result in the healing that we think it would, because it's this sort of overarching idea about how all these other beings should be if healing were to happen. But the transmission is something much more powerful and subtle than that, in which the causes and conditions can't be sort of wrangled according to our scheme. There's something much more precise about living out the Dharma that has big effects in the world. And so, in a way, I think it is inevitable for us to feel like there has been no time like this. And that's actually true. There has been no time like this, which is not to say that the other times have not also been, there's no time like this. Every time has been like that. So this way, I think, gives us a real freedom for creativity, to say, how do I face something which I can't contain or fully understand, but is calling me to illuminate it? And then all of the very present details of this life in this time then become gateways of that illumination. They call for something from us, And when that's really, one thing we face now that feels really different than before is these big, like world issues like climate change, for example, or our awareness of the kind of brutality that's happening around the world. A couple hundred years ago, this stuff was happening, but you didn't know about it when it comes to like genocide and those kinds of things. And now it's right there. So I think this would be an example of one of the things that we're called to respond to really directly. But are we going to respond, we're actually going to respond to it, or are we going to respond to our idea of this being a special situation? And that's slightly different. Every time has had their own kind of special situation. And so I get very nervous when people say, well, this is like never like before, so we're going to undermine our central values in some way because this is an existential threat. So we've got to let go of this or that or the other thing, force people to do this or force people to do that. Now, sometimes you do have to force people. I'm not saying you never get to force people. But that avenue, I think, is the seeds of a lot of difficulty. Some people want to say things like, just sit zazen and everything will be okay. I will never say that. Just sit zazen and the world will end. Yeah. I mean, the world will end, by the way. So I'm not saying we just sit by. That's not my point. But that's maybe a healthier way to think about zazen than to think that if I sit zazen, it would save the world.
Can you talk about how what we do now in the present is important for liberating the past, which I think is because usually we're going the other direction.
Yeah. Well, that's a great question. I think you have some inclination about that. Like, what's your experience of it, or what leads you to that?
That we are. Our awakening is the Buddha's awakening. Like the Buddha doesn't awaken without our input. We only awaken together.
Yeah.
Right. And this happens throughout the circle.
Yeah. So that if we go back to the image that I was presenting, you could say that in this case, the East illuminates the West, or the East's illumination of the West is the West's illumination. That the Buddha's luminosity is also being received from the luminosity of all of these beings, and I think that's really true. And then in a sense of our own life, as karma is undone or karma is liberated in the luminosity of this circle, you can have instances where it's clear. So one of the instances of this that has been talked about in this hall many times and is so just amazingly beautiful every time he talks about it is when Tenkan stopped drinking. Yeah, and many of you know Tenkan. He said, when I put down the drink, all of my ancestors put down the drink. He said it's just, and Tenkan's always arguing with me about religion. He doesn't like that Buddhism is a religion. He's not a big woo-woo kind of guy, right? But he's like, when I set it down, I could just see my mom, like the whole thing, everyone put it down. And this, in fact, is really standard Buddhist teaching that oftentimes in the West, doesn't get talked about too much because it's too kind of woo-woo or something. But say 7 generations back will be directly affected by your encounter with the way. Their liberation will be it will happen just directly. And more than that, but the 7 is really kind of emphasized. 7 also usually is a number that means ungraspable. You can't really 7 is kind of beyond your ability to contain. So 7's kind of a code word for just, it goes on, like that. So I think that's really important that we pay attention to that as we're practicing. It's not just, I want to pull my life together, or I want to make things better, or not even that I want to pull my life together or make it better for the people that are coming after me, although those are both very important reasons, but that actually it goes back, it goes back the other direction. And you can encounter that, especially if you bother making offerings to your ancestors, which is another really good thing to do. If you're doing that practice, then when you come to these places where the karmic knot is opening, then it's much easier to see that, okay, Grandma, great. Yeah.
Hey, Joe?
Mm-hmm.
So much has happened since you said what you said, that I'm hoping you get this right. Okay,
Yeah.
so you mentioned that people often come to Buddhism with, well, you didn't say this exactly, but sort of religious
Trauma or
trauma or karma or
karma,
whatever.
yeah.
Right. And that we should be aware of it.
Yeah.
I'm totally aware of it.
Yeah.
Okay. So I've been coming for 7 years, and
Yeah.
I've gotten to the place
Yeah.
where I am now comfortable saying I'm Buddhish.
Mm-hmm.
Okay. And I think it's time for me to move a little forward
Yeah.
on that one.
Yeah.
Okay, I think I'm ready. And then you made a statement today that other religions got it wrong, but we're patient.
Mm-hmm.
And I'm like, I found myself catapulted 100 miles back that way.
Yeah.
Because is that not our delusion?
Mm-hmm. Definitely.
Okay,
Yeah,
all right.
yeah.
So it's kind of an offhand statement, and I shouldn't really take it
Well-
seriously.
Say two sides. One is kind of a joke, but I would say also I make those statements partly because I like to be a little bit of a troublemaker, and I would say that we shouldn't. I think there's a certain mindset that we would have that would say everything has its own truth, and therefore I will not meet it with the capacity to see its strengths and weaknesses. I will kind of abdicate the responsibility to actually meet it by a story that everything is true. It's a very relativist type of mindset. And so we try to avoid the difficulty of meeting other religious traditions by just saying, well, all of the traditions are true, and I just happen to be drawn to this one. So that can be a good way to think about it sometimes, but it also can be a way to escape the hard work of meeting traditions. And so there's a lot of things that I just flat out disagree with people in Abrahamic faiths. And I think sow the seeds of a lot of war and destruction in our world. And I would go toe to toe with someone on debating that. I think that's the most respectful way to meet those people, not to sort of say, well, we must basically agree on everything. We actually disagree on some things. Yeah.
But those things that those people do
Right.
that are evil,
Mm-hmm.
I think Buddhists have done some evil things too.
100%.
In the
Yeah.
name of Buddhism.
Yep.
Those are not actually, are they a part of the faith? I mean,
A part of the what?
does any faith say, does any founded faith, does any basis of faith say, go kill somebody who doesn't agree with us?
Read the Old Testament. Yeah. So basically the point I'm making here is not that we should take a position in which we criticize other places from our position, right? That we know best and they don't. So in that sense, I kind of joke when I say that, but part of the reason I'm also throwing the golden apple over the wall is, do people know that reference?
No.
The god of mischief in the Greek pantheon, rode on the golden apple to the most beautiful goddess of Mount Olympus and then chucked it over the wall. And that's how all of those books you read or were forced to read got started, all the wars. Anyway, that's what I meant by the golden apple. Why I kind of feel that that's important is because I feel a danger that we have now, especially within the North American Buddhist kind of ecosystem, is that because people are a little afraid of the way that religion can be dogmatic, rightfully so, that we also have become overly relativist. We've become overly, like, we want to just embrace everything. And the capacity to discern and say, that's a problem. We need that capacity too. And so as we're coming closer to a tradition, the tradition will point us at certain things which are, are judgmental. They're a judgment. And we have to wrestle with those. It doesn't mean we just take the dogma of the tradition and then say, Ejo said those Abrahamic people were wrong, and so they're wrong. Like, I don't mean that. But actually, we should struggle with those other religious traditions, not just kind of try to round them out. You think about that. Yeah. Do. This is really, this is it's a challenging point. And I wouldn't want, if you're here, like in the same space, then really, I would say, dwell in that for a while. Like, if I'm listening to something, pay attention to the place where you kind of just sidestep the spiritual question because it's too kind of difficult to reconcile it. And you kind of say, well, everyone's basically good. You're kind of telling yourself, everyone's basically trying to find the truth. And so we should, we just have to kind of respect that. That story has serious limitations. So just pay attention, try to find out what the limitations are. That would be my main point. Yeah. Including Buddhism. Right. Hi.
And this could go on a long time, so I'll try to be brief.
Mm-hmm.
But for me, who went to many, my mother let me go wherever any neighbor wanted me to go.
Yeah.
So I earned my Bible at a Baptist Sunday school and whatever.
Yeah.
So it was an open field as far as my mother was concerned because of her negative experience. But being in Mexico, being in churches that are basically run by the Mayan people, Highland Mayan people, and it's an amalgamation of Catholicism and their own long history of ritual. And what happens for me, and I've been in other churches in other countries that were also Catholic tradition, and it's not, for me, this business of, there's truth in every religion and whatever you were just talking about. It's not about that when I'm there. It's about the deep worshiping of the people that have been there, that have kept it alive, that still practice this ancient tradition. And these people have some dark aspects in some of what they do that would be abhorrent to us.
Right.
But it's the people. It's the people. And so within any of these religions, and I do not subscribe to organized religion in general, and it's the people that carry it. Otherwise, it doesn't exist.
Right. Yeah.
And so that's where I can meet whatever that is.
Yeah.
Because within that group of people, of course, there are good people. There are people who practice from deep sincerity, and maybe all of that does have a hint of similarity.
Yeah. And if you're really meeting people, they will stink.
Exactly.
And that's my point.
Yeah.
If you're trying to convince yourself that the people don't stink, then watch out. right? And that's like across the board.
Yeah.
Across the board, within a tradition that you might be part of, or without of a tradition that you might be part of, and how do you illuminate that? How is that an illumination for you? That's where the practice is. Yeah. And that's actually, if you think you're doing that and it's all going along like really great, and it's just like you're doing something wrong. It will hurt. It will be difficult sometimes. And if it's not that sometimes, then you're whitewashing something. That's my main point. Yeah, which I don't think you're doing. And by the way, organized religion. Come on. Okay, we better stop and have some coffee.